May 26, 1941. 19:15 hours. North Atlantic, 300 miles west of Ireland. The wind comes in hard, cold, and salted, gusts that tear at fabric and voice. HMS Ark Royal shoulders into a heaving grey, her bow throwing sheets that smash white against the island. On the flight deck, a row of black-nosed Fairey Swordfish biplanes crouch with wings spread, canvas trembling, torpedoes slung under bellies like iron fruit. A green lamp winks once. Men in duffel coats sprint hunched along the deck, chocks wrenched away, lashings cast. A pilot, sub-lieutenant in a gum-stiffened Sidcot suit, climbs the port wing route and drops into a cockpit that smells of oil, cordite, and old tea. Behind him, the observer buckles in amid maps folded to corners and a stopwatch on a lanyard. Farther aft, the telegraphist, air gunner settles behind the Vickers K gun, drums clamped, wool fingerless gloves shining with damp. The Bristol Pegasus coughs, spits fire, and catches, a 9-cylinder sermon that steadies the nerves. The deck-edge batman chops his paddles. The Swordfish, the string bag, bobs and jitters toward the bow, tail up, wind clawing at struts and wire. You feel the whole ship lurch and then the biplane leaps, wheels sliding off timber into a wall of weather that wants you back and will not get you. Course 230, the observer says into the Gosport tube, voice flat with concentration. Climb to 800. Radio silence. Down on Ark Royal's flag bridge, Vice Admiral James Somerville's cap brim is wet with blown spray. He looks from the windscreen to the plot where grease-pencil tracks slash at each other, Bismarck steering for France. King George V and Admiral Tovey coming hard down from the north. Rodney battering through from the west. Force H, Renown, Sheffield, Ark Royal, angling across the Germans' path. We must slow her, Somerville says. If she reaches the Luftwaffe's umbrella, we lose her. The air staff nods, murmurs about range, bearings, and the last fix from Catalina patrols. A signal somewhere says what everybody already knows, this is the moment. An hour earlier, the sea played a cruel joke. Swordfish from Ark Royal dived out of squall and set up on a grey shape right where the plot said the enemy would be. Torpedoes slashed wakes. White plumes rose, and the wireless carried a strangled voice from HMS Sheffield, friendly, outraged, miraculously unscathed. Magnetic pistols on the British Mark 12 torpedoes had busted against rough water or tripped early, the sea itself shouting, no. Sheffield's captain swore in a voice that would salt meat. Ark Royal's torpedo officers swapped out pistols and reset depths with hands that shook only a little. Contact pistols, shallow run. No second chances left in today's light. Now the second strike rides the gale. 15 Swordfish stagger across the whitecaps in two tight packets, squalls slashing visibility to a few hundred yards, then clearing to a cruel, glassy horizon. You taste salt inside your mask. The Pegasus drones at a steady 90 knots, struts thrumming, wings flexing like a creature delighted to be in air thick with trouble. The observer stabs a gloved finger at a bearing board. Left 2, hold, steady. 20 miles ahead, Bismarck cuts a sullen wake east by southeast. She looks wrong, her paint sloughed by weather, one boat missing, a scar along her upperworks from the hood fight. On the bridge, Captain Zur C. Ernst Lindemann keeps his jaw set. Beside him, Fleet Commander Admiral Gunther Lütjens is a still figure in a storm coat. The morning's cat and mouse is over. Rudder drills, radio silence, weather gauge games, none of that matters if Ark Royal's little, slow killers find his stern. Lookouts pinch their eyes against spray and squall. The after 10, 5 centimeters flak crews stand to, fuses set, breeches oiled. The Bismarck is a fortress, but fortresses drown like anything else if someone puts a knife at the right rib. Contact, smoke, your gunner calls, his voice thin in the slipstream, head craned right. Then the observer sees it too, the dark brushstroke of a battleship's exhaust smashing low under cloud. The cold in your belly deepens, the world gets small and honest. Turning in, the observer says, businesslike. Speed steady. Torpedo safe. You come under the flak umbrella before you have time to think about it. The first bursts are too high, black flowers opening where you were. Then they find the range and the 20mm starts to chatter, tracer knitting a red-orange curtain that crawls toward you across the gray. The pilot rides the bumps, kite skipping as shell bursts step the air. The Swordfish feels like a kite on a string, your hand is the child at the end of it, deciding if it flies or crashes. Starboard element will cross her bows. Port element to stern. We want the screws, a voice had said in the briefing. Remember the gale, torp set shallow. Here that voice distills into instinct. The formation fans raggedly as squalls rip it. Ahead, you get the great ship's quarter at a slant, a dark cliff with foam gnawing its feet, 3 propeller wakes cutting braided ropes of white. Down now, the observer says, hand chopping. The nose sags. The altimeter unwinds, 700, 6, 5. At 200 feet you are in a world made of spray and iron and noise. The Bismarck stern looms, you can see men on the quarterdeck braced wide, faces turned into a wind from hell. A 37mm shell passes so close it writes a hot line across your cheek that you will only feel later. Stand by, stand by. You thumb the torpedo release and feel the swordfish lift, suddenly lighter. A green fin and a sliver of bronze vanish into the Atlantic just at the point where wake meets steel. You hold the course a heartbeat longer than comfort allows, the world widening to include nothing but the 3 white ropes behind the battleship and the animal sense of timing that says a fish moving at 40 knots will be right there, right, now. Turn, the observer barks, and you haul left, the biplane staggering into the wind, the slipstream shuddering. The quarterdeck flashes under your starboard wing, tracer missing by luck and by inches. You climb into a burst that doesn't kill you, and then the sea is briefly above the horizon and then it's below and the Pegasus coughs once and then clears. Behind, something happens that nobody in the cockpit can see all at once. A torpedo's white track lances into chaos, wake, crosswell, spray, disappears in a brown slap under the battleship's counter. Men on the quarterdeck throw themselves flat, a great hole shudders. Deep, at the place where steel and water make a private bargain, a shock moves through metal like a spoken word. The rudder assembly, twin blades aft of 3 braying screws, takes the message and keeps it. Something buckles. Something jams. In Bismarck's tiller flat, gauges jump, a helmsman's hands tighten on wheels that have gone stubborn. The answering voice over the engine room telegraph is clipped and calm, the faces are not. Up in the gale, the swordfish crews do what they came for, turn, reform, skirt into and out of squalls like moths around a lamp with knives for light. On Ark Royal's bridge, Somerville leans forward, binoculars forgotten at his chest, listening for the one report that can make a navy breathe. It doesn't come on a radio. It comes in the way the Bismarck begins to lean into a turn that isn't ordered and stays there, her wake curving, her bow walking across the chart toward nowhere useful. On a wet, cluttered bridge, Captain Lindemann says a word men will take to mean many things. Luchen's jaw tightens, then sets. Orders fly. Pumps start. Divers ready. Engines answer. The Atlantic answers back. 21:12 hours. The wake behind Bismarck starts to curl like a question mark. On the bridge, Captain Zur C. Ernst Lindemann feels it before the plot shows it, a helmsman's shoulders hunch, the deck's long, slow lean refuses to stop when ordered. Starboard funf. The wheel goes over. Nothing sensible comes back. The ship's great hips keep sliding left. Below the armor deck, in the tiller flat aft, red lamps throw greasy light over hydraulic rams bigger than small cars. The rudder telemotor hisses, obeys, on paper. In steel, something has jammed. A torpedo has struck hard under the port quarter, where screws carve and rudders think. The shock has twisted linkages or bent a blade against the stern frame. The port and starboard rudders, twins meant to answer like trained horses, now sulk at 12 degrees to port and will not straighten. Salt water slaps in through a seam that ought to be tight to the last rivet, men in rubber boots curse as they wade and brace. Oberleutnant, ing. Gerhard Junak, damage control, shoulders through, face shining with spray and heat. Sprengladungen, he says, shaped charges. We'll blow the pin if we must. He looks at the gauge board, at the rams, at the stubborn geometry of a ship that wants to turn forever. The noise in here is a machine's scream wrapped in felt, pumps hammering, fans sucking, the deep organ note of 3 great shafts turning. Up top, Fleet Commander Admiral Gunther Luchen stands a fixed point in a storm of motion. He leans over the chart. The pencil trace that was Strasbourg in safety now arcs toward the west, toward the teeth coming down from the north and west. He says, calm as a telegram, rudders jammed. We will bind them off and steer with propellers. On the engine room telegraph, bells jolt. Port astern. Starboard ahead. The screws answer, obedient and huge. Bismarck's bow grudgingly comes right a few degrees, then slouches back left when the water and the wounded metal take their due. Night slams in hard. Rain bands sweep the bridge windows like dark curtains tugged by an angry hand. The after flak mounts stand to until the order comes that no aircraft are in the sky. The men sag a little against their shields, then take up stretchers and hose lines, because there's always work that is not shooting. A message goes in tight German over ether salted with static. Luchens dictates without theater, Schiff manövrieren. Word bis zur letzten Granit kämpfen. Ship unmaneuverable. We'll fight to the last shell. Somewhere in Britain, a man in headphones under a thatched roof copies it down by lamplight and feels the small hairs rise on his forearms. To the south and east, cruiser shadows lick the edges of radar cones. HMS Sheffield rides her mistake from earlier with a grim set to her jaw, keeping station like a penitent who has found her him again. Farther out, the long, patient sweeps of Suffolk and Norfolk scratch green traces on black plots when the sea allows. In the west, Captain Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton drives HMS Rodney, a slab-sided, old, angry thing with 9 16-inch guns, down toward a dawn appointed by gunnery tables and hunger. To the north, Admiral Tovey in HMS King George V writes the sea with 27 knots worth of promise. Midnight comes stitched with lightning far off. On Bismarck's quarterdeck, men rig lines over the stern. Junak and his team, lashed off, crawl toward a space that bites. If they can get charges onto the rudder stock, if they can blow the blade free, they might trade control for drift, a devil's bargain, but one that puts bows toward France again. They lower a man, a human plumb bob, into cold black that hits like a fist. He gropes metal too close to a screw that claws the Atlantic into white ropes. The ship lurches, the line snaps, they haul him back half-drowned and beating at the air. Try again. Try again. The sea keeps the tools it wants. Shortly after midnight, new teeth arrive out of squall and spray. The 4th Destroyer Flotilla, Captain Philip Vian in HMS Cossack with Maori, Sikh, Zulu, and the Polish destroyer ORP Pio Run, find the German giant by the stink of cordite and the way the horizon grows teeth where she sits. Pyron's commander, Eugenius Ploski, pushes in rude and close, Polish pennant a ribbon in rain. I am a Pole, he is supposed to have signaled, whether he did or not, his arcs under the German guns say it loud enough. Bismarck answers like a cliff that has learned to spit fire. Her secondary 15 cm batteries bark, 105s and 37s flicker, great 38 cm turrets Anton and Bruno heave their snouts into the night and throw blind punches at phantoms slicing across the bow and stern. The destroyers lance torpedoes by stopwatch and nerve. Greenish wakes crisscross. Explosions mark where guesses met water and not steel. The Germans feel near misses as body blows, fittings jump, a light shivers and goes. Whether any fish strikes home now, in this black ballet, will be argued in wardrooms for years. The certain thing is the general harassment, every run-in is a minute the repair party does not get, every turn thrown at phantom torpedoes is a degree the jammed rudders insist on stealing back. On Bismarck's bridge, Lindemann grips the rail so hard the skin of his knuckles shines. Keep them off us, he says, and the gunnery officer answers with salvo clocks and curses. The ship's bow hunts like a wounded animal's head, dragged by a neck that will not obey. Engines throb under differential orders, port back, starboard ahead, trying to right a straight line with crooked tools. Below, Junak sets charges where hands can reach, on the rudder carrier, on places he prays will shear clean. Fuses spit. The men crouch, mouths open so their eardrums will not burst. The blast hits. The ship, already a storm, adds one more thunder. Smoke stings. Water pours. The gauge needles twitch, then, cruelly, settle. The rudders are still there and still wrong. The blades are bent into the stern frame like a door jammed into its own jam. The sea smiles without a mouth. The destroyers turn in, turn out, reload torpedoes with fingers numb in salt, argue with their own fear and the range clock. Vian keeps his pack moving, nips the lion's flanks when he can stand it, backs out when a 15 cm throws a wall where his bridge was. Pio Run stays a heartbeat too long on one run and comes away with paint scorched off by near misses, her crew laughing in that way that sounds like a cough. Bismarck's men begin to understand what fate looks like when it puts a hand squarely on your back and pushes you a direction your boots don't agree with. Repairs come to the end of their tools. The sea grows, then falls away, then grows again. The engine's song changes, becomes a lower, tired chord, fuel husband for morning. On the bridge, Lieutenant steps to the wing and looks into a black that admits no witnesses. He has sent what he must. He has the guns he has. He has the crew he believes in. He has a ship whose rudder will not answer. Toward the east, the sky gives a first thin hint of something that is not night. On Rodney's bridge, a gunnery officer closes a log he has been writing in with a stub pencil and says to nobody in particular, "Dawn, then." King George V's signal lamps practice the words they will not need to say, "Open fire." On Bismarck, Lindemann meets Junak on the starboard catwalk. Both men are wet in ways the rain did not accomplish. "Nothing?" Lindemann asks, and he already knows the answer. Junak shakes his head once. "We can steer 8-9 knots with screws," he says, voice hoarse. "No more." "Then we will see if our armor is worth what it cost," Lindemann replies, and claps the engineer on the shoulder with the respect of one master craftsman to another. He turns back into the warren of steel and will and takes a breath a man takes before he walks onto a stage. First light lifts a seam between cloud and sea. The British shapes are no longer rumors, they are geometry. Big, purposeful, wrong-colored hills on the horizon, growing. May 27, 1941. 8:15 hours. A low, iron dawn lifts on a heaving Atlantic. The wind has teeth, the sea a long gray muscle. Ahead and to starboard, two shapes grow until they are no longer shapes but reputations, HMS Rodney bullying her bow into the swell, and HMS King George V riding finer, cleaner, her tripod mast etched against the weather like a compass point. On Rodney's bridge, Captain Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton braces boots wide. Salt spatters the windows. "Open fire as soon as you've a solution," he says, a sentence that sounds like a church bell to men who have been chasing a rumor for days. Down in and beat turrets, 16-inch shells, 2,048-pound steel arguments, slide along oiled ways into breaches that close with the finality of doors in a shipyard night. The Type 284 gunnery radar hums its new, predatory note, a secret edge that turns gray into ranges and azimuths. Bearing markers move. Range drums stop. Directors settle. Rodney speaks first. The bow rises, falls, and 9 rifles answer the sea's rhythm with a triple cough that is felt in ribs before it is heard in ears. Flame decks the muzzles, then a low, rolling thunder tumbles across the water. At 23,000 yards, those shells take half a minute to arrive. That half-minute stretches, men breathe and then don't. King George V joins, 14-inch guns in full chorus, salvo clocks ticking, her fire control cool and fast. The first spread straddle, white towers shoulder up around Bismarck, geysers as tall as a block of flats. The second closes. The third bites. On the German bridge, spray slaps windows like thrown gravel. Then a hit, forward, shudders through the hull, a punch that rearranges steel and thought at once. Anton turret, forwardmost 38 centimeters, judders, then slumps. Bruno's barbette takes a gouge. The foretop, brain and eyes of Bismarck's main battery, sprouts a dirty orange flower. Fire control men vanish into black smoke that pours down the mast like a thought running backward. Bismarck answers, she must. Cassar turret aft spits back, heavy shells lofting, grey pillars straddling Rodney, one falls so close it throws green water over the British battleship's FOCSLE and leaves her bridge smelling of raw sea and hot steel. Another salvo goes long and left, the wounded rudder writing its own ciphers into every range table. Secondary 15 cm guns bark at angles that mean defiance more than geometry. The German gunnery officer fights his own ship as much as the enemy, trying to keep a director on target while the bow hunts and the horizon tilts wrong. Rodney's next salvos walk up Bismarck's spine with a butcher's patience. A 16-inch crashes into the forecastle, tears it open like a tin's lid. Another bludgeons Bruno's roof, the great turret hitches, then ceases to contribute. Superstructure, signal decks, rangefinders, the bridge wings, splinters under blows that erase conversation and command in equal measure. King George V, steadier, writes neat, punishing corrections into the sea, her pattern hugging the German's waterline so tight it feels personal. Close the range, Dalrymple Hamilton orders, feeling confidence turn into duty. Rodney shears in, thick-shouldered, flinging whole rooms of high explosive at a ship that once looked like the future and now looks like a quarry. At 10,000 yards the fall of shot is instant habit. At 8,000, the British can see what they're doing, the Bismarck's forward superstructure a burning cliff, her mast a twisted iron tree, men like dark ants running where there used to be corridors. On King George V, Admiral Sir John Tovey keeps his face still and his voice very low. Steady as she goes. Don't waste ammunition. He knows his own figures, fuel not generous, battle fleet far from home. He also knows what a cornered thing can do. Shift to deliberate fire. Smash the aft control. His gunnery officer acknowledges, eyes never leaving the director's sights. Aft on Bismarck, Cassar turret keeps throwing back until a 14-inch finds its barbette and breaks the language out of it. Dora, the aftermost 38 centimeters, never truly enters the conversation, wiring and shock in the ship's wounded gate make sure of that. The main battery is now a symbol, not a weapon. The German gunners at the 10.5s and 37s fire into a sky without targets because standing to a gun is a way to stay upright when the deck under you no longer knows what level means. Rodney edges to a range that would make a gunnery officer twitch in peacetime and does a thing no battleship has any right to brag about. She rolls a 16-inch torpedo over the side and sends it galloping at a hulk big as a cathedral. Men on the upper deck cheer too loud for the sea, then cough at the smoke that answers. Shell after shell begins to punch low, below armored belts where plates thin, into compartments that hate water. One breaks the side and the sea comes in like a guest that won't be ushered. Another buries deep and decides to talk to a boiler room about pressure in a language of heat and shrapnel. Fires ahead settle to a black, oily certainty. Aft, hoses writhe and steam writes its own weather under the boat cranes. On the starboard catwalk, Gerhard Junak staggers through smoke and heat that eats breath. He shouts for scuttling charges, for seacocks. Men haul at wheels that have not been dogged in years. Explosives thump, small, grim exclamation points amid the deeper voices of British shells. In the wireless room, a petty officer keys a last, clipped line that will go out into a world already writing the end of this story: ship sinked. Near 9:20, Rodney's shells cave in Bismarck's bridge. The voice that made signals all morning is replaced by fire. Admiral Luchens is somewhere in that ruin, Captain Lindemann somewhere between duty and gravity. Survivors later will say both stood until standing had no meaning, then went where the deck took them. You keep your eyes on a tiny figure leaping from a hot metal slope and don't notice that you've stopped breathing until you start again and taste paint and salt. By 10 o'clock, King George V's magazines look at their own shy reflections and cough out the last of what can be spared. Tovey signals that he must break off soon for fuel and husbandry. The wreck ahead still flies a flag, charred, irrational, brave. Norfolk and Dorsetshire arrive in the smoke, dark cruisers with a volunteer's posture. Secondary guns keep tapping at steel that has turned to blackout curtains and bent ladders. Finish it, Tovey orders, voice rough with something that is not triumph. Dorsetshire swings wide, honest with her intention. She rolls to the sea and then over again, tubes squared. 3 21-inch fish leave clean, white wakes that cross the broken paint of the Atlantic. One slams home amidships, another under the bows. Bismarck heaves, one last, sullen lift, as if protesting the indignity of being finished by something as workmanlike as a cruiser's torpedoes, and then settles by the stern. Men are in the water now, black dots in a field of oil. Lines go over the side on Dorsetshire and on the destroyer HMS Maori, arms haul, voices count, knives cut at clothing that drags. A boatswain heaves a sailor in by the straps of a kapok and swears at him like he's family. A midshipman leans too far and a hand clamps his belt and yanks him back to a deck that is suddenly ringed with rifles because a submarine report just bled into the wireless room and nobody wants to die generous. At 10:39, the big ship, pride of a fleet, problem of a nation, rolls slow, for the last time. Her starboard screws flash. Air blasts out of compartments in a chain of concussions you feel in your teeth. The flag dips once, then white water takes the place where it was. The sea, offended and unsurprised, closes. 10:41 hours. The Atlantic still heaves where the great hull went under. Oil spreads in rainbow skins, steam hangs in ragged curtains that the wind tears away in fistfuls. The only shapes left are small ones, Carly floats, planks, men in kapok bobbing like dark punctuation marks in a sentence the sea is finishing. On HMS Dorsetshire's FOCSLE, bosun's pipes trill thin and urgent. Lines over. Ladders over. Seamen's hands, salt-scabbed and sure, fling heaving lines that arc and slap. A stoker-turned-rescuer braces, hauls a man up hand over hand until the weight becomes a shape on the rail that coughs oil and language nobody shares. The cruiser's captain, Benjamin Martin, keeps Dorsetshire circling with screws licking the edge of the slick, Oerlikons manned, eyes squinting for periscope and fin. War does not stop because charity asks. 100 yards away, HMS Maori noses in, her Hawthorne-Leslie turbines humming a tight, taut note. A young midshipman, face too smooth for this much weather, leans over with a boat hook and snags a sodden sleeve. For a split second he meets a German's eyes, bloodshot, disbelieving, human, and hauls. The man comes over the side like a netted fish, collapses, then tries to stand and remember how decks work. In the water, Baron Burkhard von Mullenheim-Rechberg, 4th Artillery Officer, clings to a raft with fingers that no longer feel like his. The oil burns the throat, the cold burrows into thought. He watches a cruiser slide past, bright green water breaking white at the knuckle of her bow, and thinks, absurdly, of model ships in a glass case. Voices reach him through the wind and the ringing in his head. Here. Here. A line whistles, slaps the raft. He fumbles it twice, then finds it, and the raft slews toward steel. On Dorsetshire's quarterdeck, sailors brace boots, pay out, pull. A German in a shredded blue jumper kisses the deck and then, remembering where he is, tries to push himself to attention before vomiting at a chief's shoes. The chief swears a regulation oath and claps him on the shoulder as if he were a new boy come aboard. Another man, bareheaded, hair slicked flat with oil, keeps saying, Wasser. Wasser, and a hand appears in his vision with a tin cup and a word he doesn't know but understands anyway. Contact report, submarine suspected, the yeoman of signals snaps from the bridge wing, voice carrying because fear carries. The wireless has coughed up a warning, one of those thin messages that becomes a decision you can hold in your hand. Captain Martin looks at the men still in the water, at the men on his deck, at the Oerlikon crew staring seaward with jaws tight. He gives the order that will wake him from naps years from now, cease rescue. Clear the area. Lines are cut. A sailor, knuckles white on a rope tied to a man who is half aboard, saws at it with a clasp knife that suddenly seems too small for the task. The rope parts, the man drops back into the oil with a noise that is more felt than heard. The sailor makes a sound nobody can pretend is anything but what it is. Dorsetshire turns, screws churning oil and water into a wicked latte. Maori answers her helm and follows, hoses still hissing on deck where someone forgot to dog the valve shut in a hurry. They carry off just over 100 between them, shivering, burned, wide-eyed. On Maori, a messman with ears like a jug and patience like a blanket moves among the heap with enamel mugs that steam, saying, Here you are, mate, as if they shared a neighborhood. On Dorsetshire, a surgeon lieutenant works with sleeves rolled, a tray of instruments shining like the inside of a piano, the deck under his boots swaying in a rhythm his hands ignore. Hours pass in a wind that has decided to settle and then changes its mind. The destroyers of Vienna's 4th Flotilla prowl back and forth like dogs kept on a rattling chain, reluctant to quit a bone but obedient to the voice that says fuel and orders and daylight have other claims. HMS King George V, short on bunker oil, bows to arithmetic and turns north. HMS Rodney, boilers tired, steadies for the westward run with a deck that still stinks of fired cordite and salt. Men sweep brass and rake splinters, silence heavy as somebody else's coat. Afternoon drops like an old curtain. In the slicks widening, the ocean keeps counsel. A periscope lens flicks once between swells and is gone, whether it belonged to U-74 or to fear itself will be debated in books and quiet bars. What is certain is this, later, when British screws have faded to a dream, the German submarine U-74 edges in under a sky that has remembered blue, and hauls 3 men aboard with hands that shake. A German weather ship, Saxonwald, will nose through the same plot of latitude and pull others from rafts with boat hooks and oaths. The numbers will never match the names. Near dusk, a lifebelt bumps the side of Maori and nobody sees it. On the belt is printed Bismarck in letters that flake as the salt eats them. A seaman with a broom nudges it off without reading, then does read and freezes, then resumes the motion as if to undo what noticing has done. Night finds Ark Royal clawing southwest to dodge what the Atlantic throws next. On the flag bridge, Vice Admiral Somerville stands a shade apart and lets the conversation fold around him. Deck logs, sortie returns, the Swordfish crew smoke rough laughter in the ready room one deck down. Someone says, "It was the rudder, sir," and he nods once, not for history, but because that is true and exact and enough for a man who has had to ask biplanes to put a battleship on a leash. In Bismarck's last worked space aft, the water rises by inches over spanners and scuttling gear and a dented coffee mug that has made 3 cruises and a fight. The charges that Junak placed have done their small, vicious work. The sea has done the rest. A wrench floats up, turns once, and vanishes in a swirl when a bulkhead breathes out for the last time. On Dorsetshire, under a canvas rigged in a hurry, a rescued signalman, lip split, eyes burned red, stares at the lamplight with an expression you cannot quite name. A Royal Marine passes, slows, and tucks a blanket tighter around his shoulders with a care that belongs to a different world than this one. Somewhere aft, a gramophone that has no business surviving anything plays a thin, brave tune that loses to the wind and then wins back 2 bars at a time. Just before midnight, spray pox the bridge windows. The watch changes with a quiet that might be respect or exhaustion. A leading seaman notes bearing and speed in a log and writes, out of habit more than poetry, dark. Moderate sea. Oil smell persists. He dots the I in oil with a jab that tears the paper, then closes the book with a palm that lingers. Far astern, over a rectangle of coordinates that means more now than chartmakers intended, the Atlantic smooths its face. If you didn't know where to look, you'd pass and never guess. If you did, you might slow a little without knowing why.